Now seems like a pretty good time to just kind of grab some of these controllers and play around with them just to make sure that everything is behaving as we'd expect and making sure that these independent controllers aren't attached to anything by mistake. These pole controllers are going to be just floating out here. They're not going to have any parents or anything like that. We will end up grouping all of these together to clean things up, but within this relative space, these guys aren't going to have any controller related parents or anything like that. So I'm just going to grab some of these controllers and just make sure these hips are swinging just the way they should, and all of our spines are moving properly and the head is bending. So I'm just going to shift select all these head spine joints and see how he does the limbo there. Looks like he's doing a pretty good job. And move his clavicles, make sure his stuff is working there. And we actually parented the hand to the center controller, if you remember, which looks all right here. But when we go to move the clavicle, we may actually want that parented there instead. So we can easily fix that by unparenting the hand controllers and reparenting them to the clavicles instead. I think that would make a lot more sense. So when he reaches forward, the arm will move and it's not stuck back there. So all we need to do is grab the hand and do a Shift P. And if you look over in the outliner, you'll see that hand has now appeared outside of the hierarchy where it was. It was once nested underneath the center controller. And we'll do the same with the right hand. We'll do a Shift P after selecting it, and that will also pop out down here. And with that right hand controller selected, we can Shift select our clavicle controller and press the P key. Now in the outliner you'll see that our hand controller disappeared. It's actually gone underneath our hierarchy once again. And now when we swing the clavicle and he goes to reach forward, that hand moves. And I think that's going to be a better solution for that controller. And now we'll do the exact same here. For the left hand, we'll grab the hand controller, shift select the clavicle, press P, and give it a rotate. He's reaching forward, and I think that looks good. Now if you take a look over here in the outliner, you'll notice that things are looking a little more tidy now that things have found their place in the hierarchy. Most of our controllers have gone under this center controller here, because when we move that, we're moving most of the controllers. And that's the way things should be. But there's still some more things we can do over here to keep things organized. And there's also a few things we want to do to add to the rig itself and add to the controllers. And we can do that by creating groups and adding constraints to those groups. So I'm going to start by taking all of our rig related things and putting them all in one group. And I want to do this because in the future, I want to be able to scale this rig, and I want to be able to scale the character and have that as a feature of our rig. So using this global controller, I want to be able to scale this up and down and move it around and get scaling and movement all in this one controller for the entire rig, just in case. It's just a nice feature to have. So to do that, I'm going to grab this global controller and kind of bring it down here because we're not going to be grouping that. But we do want to group everything else. So I'm going to shift select this top object here, which happens to be our inverse heel joint system here. And then I'm going to go down and shift select the root joint. And now I've selected everything in our scene but the character, the scene lights, and the global controller. And from here, all I have to do is do Control G, and that will successfully group all those objects under that one group there. And we can actually use this group in our rig system by constraining it to the global controller. So if you take that group, just clicking on this group, you can see you can translate this group, and you're also just translating everything underneath it. And at the same time, you can scale this group, and everything underneath that group will scale as well. So we'll want to name this group Rig Group. You can really choose any name you want, but make sure it's known that this is containing all the features of our rig. So things like the controllers and the skeleton are all in here. And then I'm going to collapse that. And now I'm going to grab everything, including the mesh, and I'm just going to control select all these objects. And I'm going to group those as well. And I'm going to call this character dwarf hero. And this name here will be the object that the other developers will see in the engine. So when you import this into an engine, they have this nice handy title to call this object. It'll be the character, and it'll be the dwarf hero character. So it'll be very identifiable. And then we have all the messy bits that we deal with underneath. They don't need to concern themselves with those. So this just makes importing into engines a little more seamless and a little more understandable for other developers. Now I'm going to open up this rig group again, And I'm just going to do a little organizing in here because things are kind of funny to read. Like it's hard to parse for me. I like to have things a little more organized than this. So I'm going to put things kind of organized in my own personal way. You can organize them however you like, but I'll show you how I organize them. And maybe you'll like it, and maybe you'll want to do the same thing. So first, this root is pretty important. I'm just going to put it at the top. This is our entire skeleton. I just feel like that should be at the top. We have these inverse joints, which we're not really going to be concerning ourselves with until a little later. And then we have all the left and right side controllers. So I'm going to take these and kind of organize them by left and right. So I like to start with left here. So we have our left arm pole, left leg pole, and then our left foot here. I'm just going to put the foot at the top. That's a little more important to me. And then we have the right foot. And under that, I'm just going to follow the same pattern as the left. We have the arm. Goes under there. And we have the right leg pole con. And then next we have the eyes. I guess I'll put the eyes at the top because eyes are on the top of your head, right? That makes sense. And then the center here can stay at the bottom. I think that's fine right there where that belongs. You can always move these around whenever. This organization that we're doing here is pretty superficial, and it looks a little better to me. And now that we have the peace of mind of an organized rig group folder, we can actually put it into practice by constraining it with this global controller that we have, so that when we scale and move this global controller, it scales and moves our entire rig, and eventually our character will also move along with it. So for that to happen, we need to have our global controller selected, and then we can go over here in the outliner and control select our rig group here. Then we want to make sure we're in the rigging tool set by selecting rigging in this dropdown, and then going over to constrain, and we're going to select the scale constraint. And that does exactly what you'd imagine. It lets us scale what's being constrained by scaling our global controller. Now to have this character following the global controller when we move and rotate it, we can do the same thing, only we use a different constraint. So we'll first select the global controller, and then in the outliner we'll control select our rig group, and then we'll go up to constrain, and then we'll use the parent constraint and click on that. And now when we select our global controller and move it around or rotate it, the whole rig will follow, and that can come in handy in some circumstances. So it's a nice feature to include in your rig. And there's one last thing I want to take a look at with this rig before we move on, and that is the inputs that these controllers that we made have. So they basically have history nodes inside them. So for example, you can select this neck controller and go up to the channel box. And if you scroll down the channel box, you'll see that there are inputs. And this is history from when we transformed these controllers. And a lot of the different controllers that we made have these inputs. So what we'll want to do is delete our history before we continue. So with the channel box open, you can go up to Edit, Delete All by Type, and you can select History here. And when you do that, pay attention to the channel box because you'll see those inputs disappear. And that just helps keep things nice and clean when we're applying the skins and when we're animating, because Maya won't be remembering those different transforms that could cause trouble during those processes. And it's also something that we don't want to be exporting with our character into the engine, because our engine might take those inputs and use them in some unexpected way as well. And with that, our rig is complete. We created a system of controllers with constraints that allow us to move the skeleton around so that the character will behave as we intended. We can now begin the process of binding our mesh to our skeleton so our dwarf character can be animated.